Welcome again to our study in the book of Daniel. Today we're going to be studying the seventh chapter of this wonderful book, and I've entitled it God's Future Reigns. Let me ask you a couple questions as we begin. Have you ever felt overwhelmed or defeated by evil? Have you ever wondered where God was or what was he up to? How can we change our view of evil and God? When you watch the news on TV or your internet feed, you're probably asking some of these questions. God, why? Many people in our world are asking, why all the evil in the world? And God, if you do exist, why do you let it happen? Doesn't God care? Why doesn't he do something about all the evil in the world? I mean, why does he continue to allow wars to happen and innocent lives to be taken? Well, these are pretty hard questions, aren't they? And there really is no easy answer to them. And so as we look at chapter 7, I begin to think to myself, I wonder if Daniel and his contemporaries, the people of Israel, had similar questions that they were asking. They had been decades already in Babylon, taken from their home in Judah and in Jerusalem. They were being ruled by a merciless empire. And I have to wonder if they were asking, God, we're your people. We're the people of your promise. Why are you letting this happen to us? Don't you care? Don't you see what's happening? And as we come to the second half of Daniel's book, we come to one of the most difficult chapters to understand. It's a chapter full of dreams and visions of ferocious animals and kingdoms and horns and little horns. Bible scholars refer to Daniel's dreams and visions as apocalyptic literature. The word comes from the Greek and simply means to be unveiled. Through these dreams and visions, God unveils for Daniel the events happening in his day so that he can see what is going on behind the scenes. Daniel is afforded the privilege of seeing how God is on his throne, in control of events, and that events are all part of his plan to restore his kingdom to earth. Now, if you would like more information on apocalyptic literature, check out this link that I've included in the chat with the questions and discussion. Well, what does all of this mean? Well, let's take a look together in Daniel chapter 7. These chapters and their meaning have been studied and argued by Bible scholars throughout history. And much of the prophecies speak of future events. But let's not forget they also speak to the contemporary situation Daniel and his people, the Jews, were experiencing. And let's not avoid or forget that at the same time, these messages speak an encouraging practical word for us today. When we understand the meaning of these visions and the dreams, our perspective of evil and God's purposes are revealed. We come to understand that God has not forgotten his people. He's not forgotten this planet, but he's very much in control. Well, Daniel's vision here begins in verse 1 of chapter 7 with a vision of beasts from the sea. Let's read it together. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Now, how could it be written when Belshazzar was king of Babylon? In chapter 7, we read that the Medes and the Persians were now in charge. Well, Warren Wiersbe, a noted Bible scholar and commentator, gives a plausible explanation. He writes, King Nabonidus was monarch over the empire, but he made his son Belshazzar ruler over Babylon. And the first year of his reign was probably 553 BC. This means that the events described in chapters 7 and 8 preceded those described in chapters 5 and 6. Daniel at that time was 70 years old at the time that these events occurred. Now, Daniel probably arranged the material in this book so that the records of his interpretation of the dreams and visions came before the visions of the Lord that the Lord gave him. Except for Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great image that's explained in chapter 2. The other visions in chapters 2 through 6 don't have that wide a sweep of application as do the visions that Daniel had in chapter 7, 8, and 9. And so we go on. Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the sea. Now in the Bible, a restless sea is a frequent biblical image for the nations of the world. From our point of view, the nations seem to work out their own destinies, but the invisible winds of God blow over the surface of the water to accomplish his will in his time. And if there's one message that is emphasized throughout this book, it is that the Most High rules in the kingdom of man. Verse 3, four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. Now the angel told Daniel that the four beasts represented four kingdoms, the same sequence of empires that Nebuchadnezzar had in his dream that we read about in chapter 2. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being and had the mind of a human given to it. This represented the empire of Babylon, which in Nebuchadnezzar's image was a head of gold. In the Bible, Babylon is identified with both the lion and the eagle. The description of the lion being lifted up to stand like a man and then given a man's heart, well, doesn't this remind us of how God humbled King Nebuchadnezzar and made him live like an animal for 7 years? That was back in Daniel chapter 4. And here, God told Daniel that the Babylonian Empire would fall. And in verse 5, Daniel says, there was before me a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. What does this mean? No doubt this symbolized the empire of the Medes and Persians who defeated Babylon in chapter 5. And it further parallels the arms and chest of silver in the great image of chapter 2. The bear was raised up on its side because the Persians were stronger than the Medes. And interpreters aren't agreed on the meaning of the 3 ribs that the bear carried in its mouth, and the best explanation we have is that they stand for Lydia, Egypt, and Babylon, nations that the Medes and Persians had conquered. And so in verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. We know this to be representative of Alexander the Great and the swift conquests of his army, resulting in the incredible expansion of the kingdom of Greece. This beast is identified with number 4. 4 heads and 4 horns in chapter 8, verses 8, 21, and 22. Alexander's untimely death in 323 BC left him without a successor, and his kingdom was divided into 4 parts and assigned to 4 of his generals to lead. Look, there's one more kingdom. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. No doubt, this represents the Roman Empire, a strong and enduring empire, as strong as iron and as uncompromising as a beast on the hunt. The Roman army swept across the ancient world and defeated one empire extending from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Caspian Sea, and from North Africa north to the Rhine and Danube rivers. Egypt, Palestine, and Syria were all under Roman domination. In the great movement of ancient history, one empire was replaced by another, leading up to the establishment of the Roman Empire. The two visions that we read in chapters 2 and 7 of Daniel make it clear that God knows the future and controls the rise and fall of nations and rulers. Daniel was then living in the Babylonian Empire, but he knew that Babylon would be taken by the Medes and Persians, and that Greece would conquer the Medo-Persian Empire, and Rome would eventually conquer all. Prophecy truly is history written beforehand. These four kingdoms, represented by the four beasts, have all come and gone. However, verse 12 indicates that each kingdom continues to exist in some way within the succeeding kingdom that devoured it. But Daniel saw in his vision something that wasn't revealed to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. Look at verse 8. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and three of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. This last final kingdom on earth would be a frightful kingdom. It would be unlike any of the previous kingdoms that ever existed, and would even declare war on God and his people. This kingdom is described in Revelation 13 as the kingdom of Antichrist, an evil kingdom that will be destroyed when Jesus Christ returns to earth. This judgment was depicted in Nebuchadnezzar's dream as the stone cut without hands that tumbled down the mountain and destroyed the image. We've seen in these verses, Daniel sees the rise and fall of five kingdoms: the Babylonians, the Medes and Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the kingdom of Satan headed up by Antichrist. But the most important kingdom of all is the kingdom that Christ shall establish on earth to the glory of God, the kingdom that Christians long for each time they pray, "Your kingdom come." And we see this in verse 9. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his hair was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and his wheels were ablaze. The term Ancient of Days in chapter 7, verses 9, 13, and 22 is the Old Testament name and description of God, emphasizing his eternality. He is the God who existed from eternity past. He has planned all things and is working out his plan. Daniel further writes that he sees a river of life was flowing, coming out before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Oh, I'm reminded of Revelation chapters 4 and 5, where we see the crowds thronging the throne of God. This vision of God's throne also parallels Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 15 through 27. The fire speaks of his holiness and judgment against sin, the wheel symbolizing his providential working in the world in ways that you and I can understand. He continues in verse 11, I continued to watch because of the boastful words of the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority but were allowed to live for a period of time. Daniel sees how God is praised by the multitude of saints and angels in Revelation 5:11. As the books are open and God prepares to judge evil on the earth. And no matter what Satan and the Antichrist or any other government does on earth, Daniel reminds his people, he reminds you and me, no matter how long it takes, God is still on the throne and he alone executes judgment. Daniel says in verse 13, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Who is this Son of Man? Well, we know that to be the title of the Lord Jesus Christ, a title he gave himself. It's used 82 times in the Gospels. The phrase clouds of heaven speak of his promise to return in glory and reign on the earth. The Son of Man is presented before the throne of the Father and given dominion over all nations, an everlasting dominion that will never pass away. Unlike the four kingdoms and the kingdom of Antichrist, the kingdom of Jesus Christ can never be removed or destroyed. This is the kingdom that God had in mind when he told David that his throne in 2 Samuel 7:13 and 16, he told David that his throne would never end, and he will share his kingdom with his people, and they shall reign with him. This divine victory is further described in verses 15 to 28. He writes, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise on the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it, yes, forever and forever. In this dramatic vision, Daniel sees a vast sweep of history beginning with the Babylonian kingdom and closing with the reign of Christ on earth. Doesn't this give you comfort? Doesn't this strengthen your resolve? And how it must have strengthened Daniel and given him faith for his people who were in exile, that one day Messiah would come and rule from the throne of David. The Church of Jesus Christ in 1 Thessalonians, we read, looks for a Savior to return, and we will be caught up to meet him in the air. We shall return with him to earth, reigning with him and serving with him. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. But Daniel is still curious. He wants to know more. So in verse 19, he says, I wanted to know more of the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying with its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devours its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully, as I watched this horn was raging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from all the others. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppose his holy people and try to change the set times and laws. The holy people, though, the holy people will be delivered into his hands for times and time and a half. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. How does Daniel respond to all that he has seen and heard? Well, he's gobsmacked. His jaw is down on the ground. In fact, he says, I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale. So I kept the matter to myself. The chapter ends with Daniel being told more detailed description of what all the symbols mean. But to be honest, it raises more questions than it answers. So it's important to remember that the author is not writing history in advance, but rather helping his readers like you and I grasp a biblical view about the nature of evil and God. And if that's the case, what specifically are we supposed to realize? What does all this mean, and how should you and I respond to the evil that seems so pervasive in our world? Well, let's consider a couple things about evil. Number 1, evil seems unconquerable. It is not. Given the perpetual onslaught of bad ruler after bad ruler, it's easy to become disillusioned, despondent, and even critical. Sometimes life seems to follow the life cycle of a small banana republic. The government's bad, rebels rise up and take over, then they end up being worse than those they replaced. Or in the workplace, you think you have a bad boss until that boss is removed and replaced. And oftentimes the replacement is even equally as bad or worse than the former. It seems like there is nothing to be done in the face of evil. Bad guys seem to prosper, and while the good are exploited, abused, and taken advantage of. It's easy in such circumstances to feel like the only choice one has is to roll over and play dead, accept it all, and just give up trying to go on. There are other passages that address this common human frustration. Psalm 73 is a notable one. But it's important to see that one purpose of this passage of the 4 beasts is to show us, yes, evil is real. And yes, evil is powerful. And yes, evil goes bad to worse. But no, it is not unconquerable. When the Ancient of Days comes and the Son of Man is given authority, he defeats the most ferocious of the empires. This is to remind us that God's delay is not because of weakness or not our disinterest. Evil is not stronger than God. God has a plan, and one day he will defeat evil conclusively and finally. Second thing to note, evil seems never ending, it is not. Evil can sometimes seem like it will never end. Bad rulers get replaced by worse rulers, and bad bosses get replaced by worse bosses. There is never a break in the onslaught. It seems not just undefeatable, but unending. This is not the case. God will bring an end to evil. And that's the meaning of one of the most enigmatic phrases in all of Daniel. Verse 25 says that the last of the evil beast, the little horn, will be given power for times and a half. Many interpret this to mean 3.5 years. Others say that it's just speaking of a short time. But here's the point. It's not going to last forever. Evil seems to last forever. But the day is coming when it will be judged, when Jesus Christ returns and he defeats Antichrist and his kingdom. Evil seems like it never ends, but it will one day be forever gone. Next, notice how this passage corrects our view of God in the face of evil. The picture of the God given in the Ancient of Days is designed to correct our view of God and how he handles evil. Number one, our God is not ignorant, but he is wise. God is shown as having white hair, a symbol of wisdom. He is not caught off guard by evil. He is not unsure about what to do. We may be tempted sometimes to think that God doesn't know what he's doing. And this image reminds us that God is wise. He has a plan, and we need to trust him. Secondly, God is not compromising about righteousness. Sometimes we respond to overwhelming evil by feeling like we need to compromise. Maybe our standards are the problem. If we could relax, maybe things would go easier for us. We might be tempted to think that the reason God does not intervene in the midst of evil is because he is uncompromising as well. He makes deals and lowers his standards. Well, this isn't the case. That's a lie from the pit. His white clothes and his vision reminds us that God is righteous, loving, merciful, and forgiving, but that never means he accepts sin by calling it good. God's love does not deny sin. Sin? What sin? He doesn't dismiss sin. Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. God's love acknowledges the destructive power of sin and provides a way for us to be saved from it. All of that should remind us that God is righteous. He is holy. He cares about right and wrong. He is, thirdly, not dismissive, but he does judge. Sometimes it seems like the only verse some people know is Matthew 7:1. Judge not, lest you be not judged. You ever hear about that? Don't judge me. One of the errors we make is that God doesn't judge. And that's not the case. He does judge, and his judgment is correct. He hates sin, and he will one day come to judge and destroy it. The wrath of God is revealed against all the unrighteousness of men, says Romans 1 verse 8. He desires us to be separate from sin and to experience the life he has for us. God is not defeated, but he is the conqueror. The Ancient of Days gives the Son of Man a kingdom that's everlasting. Every beast, no matter how terrifying, only rules for a time. God is not exhausted. He's not blindsided by sin. He is wise and powerful and is working out a plan that will achieve the final destruction of evil. And knowing these lessons we're supposed to get from this chapter, how ought we to respond? Well, let me give you 3 recommendations. Number 1, trust. Do not fear or give up or give in. Trust God. Remind yourself of who he is and what he has promised. Believe God and not the world. Secondly, persevere. Hebrews 12:2 tells us, run with endurance the race set before us. And that race is long. We need endurance. The race is hard. We need to persevere. Perseverance just means to keep going. Do not worry about how fast or how hard that you're running. Just decide that you're not going to stop. Keep in the race that God has placed. Thirdly, pray. The first two things on this list can be done impersonally. You can tell yourself to trust and tell yourself to persevere. But this last one reminds us to stay in connection with God. Pour out your heart to him. He knows the road is hard. We do not have to pretend it isn't. Hebrews 5, 6, and 7 remind us, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting your care upon him, because he cares for you. In prayer, cast your cares upon God. Tell him your doubts. Tell him your fears. Tell him your frustrations. Tell him your bewilderments. He cares for you. He will sustain you. You're not supposed to do it alone, so don't even think of trying. God loves you, my friend. He's got your life. If he's got this world in the palm of his hands, how much more does he have you in the palm of his hands? Yeah, that's right, you. So you can trust him today. You can give him your life today with confidence. You can move forward knowing that in the end, we win because God is in control. So glad you could join us. If you want more out of this, there are questions, discussion questions in the chat. If you would like to invite some friends, I encourage you, invite some friends or family to view this teaching and study this chapter together. Be encouraged, and remember, if you would like to join us in person at Highway Christian Fellowship, we meet every Sunday at 10364 McDonald Park Road in Sydney, British Columbia. We're right in between the airport and the ferry. We gather every Sunday morning at 10:30. We have opportunities for worship, for prayer, for service. The children have a ministry time for them, so bring your family. We look forward to being with you. God bless, and we'll see you again next time.